It was a quiet Friday evening when Claire heard the knock at her door. She lived alone in a small town outside of Portland, her life simple and predictable. After her divorce 5 years ago, she had grown used to silence in the kitchen when she cooked, silence in the living room when she sat with a book, silence in the bedroom when she turned off the light at night. At first, that silence had been unbearable, but over time it had become her routine, her armor. She no longer expected anyone to break it, so when she opened the door and found Alex, her nephew, standing there with a sheepish smile, her heart skipped a beat. "Surprise," he said, lifting a small duffel bag onto his shoulder. Claire blinked in shock. The last time she had seen Alex was at Thanksgiving the year before, when the whole family gathered at her sister's house. He was 24 now, taller than she remembered, his features sharper, more grown up. His messy brown hair fell into his eyes, and though his grin was familiar, there was a seriousness behind it that startled her. "Alex," she said, her voice unsure. "What are you doing here?" "I needed a break," he admitted, glancing past her into the warm glow of her home. "I thought maybe I could stay here for a little while, if that's okay." Claire hesitated. She had always been close to Alex when he was younger. She used to babysit him during summers, taking him to the park, teaching him how to bake cookies, laughing at his endless questions. But then life had changed. He had grown older, she had pulled into herself after the divorce, and their bond had slowly faded into distant family ties. Still, looking at him, now standing in the cold night air, his hopeful expression tugging at her heart, she couldn't say no. "Of course," she said softly. "Come in." He stepped inside, the warmth of the living room wrapping around him. Claire noticed how he looked around, as if remembering the place. She had redecorated over the years, trading bright colors for softer ones, filling shelves with books instead of family photos. Yet when his eyes landed on the small framed picture of him and her from years ago, when he was just a boy holding a kite, they lingered. "You still have this," he said quietly. Claire felt her chest tighten. "Of course I do. That was one of the best days we ever had." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with memories. Then Alex set down his bag and smiled again, trying to break the tension. "So, where do I sleep?" She led him to the guest room, which had been unused for months. The bed was neatly made, though the air smelled faintly of lavender sachets. She kept tucked in drawers. He dropped his bag on the floor and sat down, letting out a long sigh of relief. "You okay?" Claire asked gently. "Yeah," he said, but his voice betrayed him. "Just tired from everything." Claire wanted to ask more, but she stopped herself. Instead, she patted his shoulder and said, "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." That night, Claire sat in bed with her book open but unread. She couldn't stop thinking about Alex. He was her nephew, yes, but he wasn't a little boy anymore. Life had changed him, carved edges into him she hadn't seen before. And though she told herself not to overthink, she couldn't shake the feeling that his sudden arrival carried more weight than he had admitted. That next morning, she found him in the kitchen making coffee. The sight startled her. She had grown so used to being the only one there, moving quietly, never expecting to see another figure leaning against the counter. He looked relaxed, like he belonged. "Morning," he said with a grin. "I figured you'd want some coffee." She smiled despite herself. "You remembered. Of course. 2 sugars, right?" Her chest warmed. He remembered. After all these years, they sat at the table together, the steam rising between them. At first, their conversation was light about the weather, his college classes, her work at the library. But soon, the surface talk gave way to something deeper. "I just didn't know where else to go," Alex admitted finally. "Everything feels so overwhelming lately. School, work, friends. It's like everyone expects me to have it figured out, but I don't." Claire listened quietly, her heart aching. She knew that feeling all too well, the weight of expectations, the fear of failing, the loneliness that came with trying to appear strong. She wanted to tell him it would all be okay, but she remembered how much she used to resent those words when people said them to her. So instead, she simply said, "You don't have to figure it all out right now." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, trust, maybe even recognition. For the first time in years, Claire felt Sanat as someone's sister. Not as someone's ex-wife, not as a woman who lived quietly in a small house, but simply as herself. That evening, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. The two of them settled in the living room with bowls of popcorn and a movie playing on the TV. Claire tried to focus on the film, but her mind kept drifting. She was hyper-aware of Alex beside her, of the quiet comfort of having someone close, of the way his presence filled the silence she had lived with for so long. Halfway through, Alex turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I always felt like I could talk to you more than anyone else in the family. Even when I was a kid. You listened. You never made me feel stupid." Claire's throat tightened. She forced a smile. "That's because you never were stupid, Alex. You were just growing, asking questions. That's what makes people smart." He studied her face for a long moment, and she felt her pulse quicken under his gaze. Something about the way he looked at her was different. Not the way a boy looks at an ant, but the way a man looks when he sees someone in a new light. And that realization both frightened and stirred something deep inside her. Before she could respond, the power flickered, the screen going dark. The storm outside had knocked out the electricity. The house fell into shadows, lit only by the glow of a few candles Claire had lit earlier. Alex chuckled. "Guess it's just us and the rain now." Claire laughed softly, though her heart was racing. The sound of the storm wrapped around them, the flickering light casting long shadows across the room. The moment felt charged, alive, as if the air itself carried a secret waiting to be spoken. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, she realized how much had changed, not just in him, but in herself. She didn't say anything, not yet. But she knew, with a certainty that made her chest ache, that this visit would not be like any other, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what it might mean. The storm raged through the night, lightning flashing against the windows, the sound of rain echoing across the roof. Claire sat on the couch with Alex beside her, the bowl of popcorn long forgotten. The power outage made the room feel smaller, closer, as if the storm had trapped them together in a moment outside of time. Alex leaned back, his arm resting casually along the back of the couch. It wasn't touching her, but Claire felt its nearness like a current running through the air. She tried to focus on the sound of the rain, but her thoughts kept circling back to him, how grown up he looked, how different his voice sounded, how strange it felt to have him here after so long. "You know," Alex said suddenly, his tone softer than before, "I used to imagine nights like this when I was a kid. Staying up late, listening to the storm, talking about things that mattered. Back then, I thought you were the only adult who really understood me." Claire turned her head, startled by the honesty in his voice. His eyes were on the flickering candle flame, not on her. But she could hear the weight behind his words. "I didn't realize I made that much of a difference." She admitted. "You did," he said firmly. "More than anyone else." The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long she had felt invisible, just another middle-aged woman in a small town moving through life unnoticed. But here was Alex reminding her that she mattered. That she had mattered all along. The storm outside cracked with thunder, but inside the silence grew thicker. Claire's heart beat quickly. Not from fear, but from something she didn't want to name. She stood, needing to break the moment. "I'll get us some blankets. The power might not come back for a while." When she returned, Alex had shifted closer to the center of the couch, leaving space beside him. She hesitated only a second before sitting down, spreading the blanket over both of them. The warmth was immediate, the closeness undeniable. For a while they listened to the storm in silence, the rhythm of rain filling the gaps between their breaths. Then Alex spoke again, his voice low. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" Claire nodded. "Of course. If I feel lost," he said simply, "like I'm walking in circles. I try to be strong, to figure things out, but the truth is, I don't know who I am yet, and it scares me." His honesty pierced her heart. She had once felt the same at his age and sure of herself, pretending she was fine when she wasn't. She remembered lying awake at night, wishing someone would simply listen. And now, here he was, asking for that same gift. "You don't have to have everything figured out," she said gently. "Life isn't a straight line. It bends, it twists, and sometimes it feels like you're standing still. But you're not. You're moving even when you don't realize it." Alex finally looked at her then, his eyes catching hers in the dim light. "That's why I came here. I thought, maybe being with you would help me find something I've been missing." Her breath caught. The way he said it, the weight behind those words, stirred something inside her that she couldn't ignore. She wanted to look away, but his gaze held her before either of them could speak again. The lights flickered back on, breaking the moment. Claire blinked against the sudden brightness, standing quickly. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "I guess the storm's over." But she knew, deep down, that another storm had just begun, one that had nothing to do with the rain. The next day was bright, sunlight pouring through the curtains as if the night before had been a dream. Claire busied herself with chores, trying to shake off the unease she felt. She told herself she was overthinking, that Alex was just her nephew, nothing more. But when he walked into the kitchen, hair messy from sleep, smiling at her like she was the only person in the world, her resolve wavered. They spent the morning together, running errands in town. At the grocery store, Claire noticed how people looked at them, two adults shopping side by side, laughing softly as they debated which brand of coffee to buy. Two strangers, they didn't look like aunt and nephew. They looked like something else. The realization made her cheeks warm. At lunch, sitting across from him at a small diner, Alex asked her questions she hadn't expected. "Do you ever wish you could start over? Go back and choose a different path?" She thought about her divorce, about the years of loneliness, about the small life she had built for herself. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remind myself that every path, even the painful ones, brought me here. And maybe here is where I'm supposed to be." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're stronger than you think." His words lingered with her long after they left the diner. That evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold and pink, Claire found herself sitting on the porch with Alex. The air was cool, the world quiet after the storm. She wrapped her arms around herself, but Alex noticed and draped a sweater over her shoulders. "Thanks," she murmured. He smiled softly. "You always took care of me. Maybe it's my turn now." Her chest tightened. She didn't know how to respond. She wanted to tell him that he didn't need to, that she was fine. But the truth was, she wasn't fine. Not really. And somehow, he seemed to see that without her saying a word as the evening deepened. Their conversation drifted again into personal territory, his doubts, her regrets, the dreams they both carried quietly. With every word, the distance between them shrank. They weren't just aunt and nephew anymore. They were two souls broken in different ways, finding comfort in each other's company. At one point, Alex turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, but when I'm here with you, it feels like I can breathe." Claire's heart thudded in her chest. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She wanted to tell him that she felt it too, that strange, undeniable closeness that had grown between them. But fear held her back. Instead, she looked away, watching the last light fade from the sky. "You'll figure it out," she said softly. "We both will." Later that night, when she went to bed, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't ignore it any more, the pull between them, the way her heart reacted when he was near. She told herself it was wrong, that it was just the loneliness talking. But deep inside, she knew there was more. She closed her eyes, trying to will the thoughts away. But just as sleep began to take her, she heard a soft knock at her bedroom door. "Claire?" Alex's voice was low, hesitant, her breath caught. She sat up, her pulse racing. "Yes?" There was a pause, then he said, "Can we talk? I can't sleep." And in that instant, she knew whatever was happening between them was only just beginning. The quiet knock on the door still echoed in Claire's mind as she sat frozen on her bed. For a moment, she thought about pretending to be asleep, letting the silence stretch until Alex gave up and walked away. But something in his voice, the vulnerability, the need pulled her from the safety of her hesitation. She opened the door slowly, and there he stood. His hair was messy, his t-shirt wrinkled, and yet he looked more grown than ever. Shadows from the hallway, light sharpening his features. He didn't step inside at first. He just looked at her, searching her face for an answer she hadn't spoken yet. "I couldn't sleep," he said again, his tone soft, almost apologetic. "The storm last night's still in my head, and everything we talked about, too." Claire nodded, stepping aside. "Come in." He sat on the edge of her bed while she remained standing for a moment, clutching the edges of her robe as if it were a shield. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable, like a question waiting to be asked. Finally, Alex broke it. "I keep thinking about the things I told you yesterday. About being lost. About not knowing where I'm headed." He looked down at his hands, twisting them together. "And I keep wondering if maybe the reason I feel so lost is because I've been looking in the wrong places." Claire's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" He lifted his gaze to hers, steady now. "I mean that maybe what I've been missing isn't out there. Maybe it's right here." The words sank deep, stirring something inside her that she had been trying so hard to bury. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of who they were, of the lines they weren't supposed to cross. But the truth was written in her chest. She felt it too. She had felt it since the storm. Since the moment his eyes had lingered on hers a little too long. She sat beside him, close but not touching, her pulse racing. "Alex," she said carefully, "sometimes feelings can confuse us, especially in moments like this." "I'm not confused," he said firmly. "Not anymore." The certainty in his voice left her breathless. She wanted to deny it, to push the words back into the dark, but her heart betrayed her. She had spent years living in silence, telling herself she didn't deserve more than the quiet life she had built. And now, here was Alex looking at her like she was the answer to everything he had been searching for. The room grew still. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the faint ticking of the clock on her nightstand. Time seemed to hold its breath. Claire stood suddenly, moving toward the window. "It's late. You should get some rest," she said, her voice trembling. But before she could step away, he rose too. His hand brushed lightly against her arm, not gripping, not forcing, just asking. She froze at the touch, her body betraying the calm she tried to hold. Slowly she turned, finding him standing closer than before. His expression wasn't reckless or careless, was careful, patient, as though he knew how fragile the moment was. "Claire," he whispered, her name heavy with meaning. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She knew she had a choice to turn away, to lock this moment in silence forever, or to admit what she had been feeling all along. When she opened her eyes again, she saw the truth reflected in his. The same longing, the same fear, the same hope. But before either of them could speak again, a sound broke through the stillness, the sudden buzz of her phone on the nightstand. The spell shattered. Claire stepped back quickly, her chest rising and falling as she tried to steady herself. "It's late," she said again, her voice firmer this time. "We should both sleep." Alex studied her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face. Then he nodded slowly and stepped toward the door. "Good night, Claire. Good night," she whispered. When the door closed behind him, Claire sank onto her bed, her body trembling with emotions she couldn't name. The room felt colder now, emptier, as if something vital had been taken with him when he left. The next morning was filled with unspoken tension. At breakfast, Alex tried to act normal, chatting about the weather and the plans for the day, but his eyes kept drifting to her, searching for signs. Claire busied herself with the dishes, answering in short replies. Her heart still tangled in the memory of the night before. They decided to take a walk by the lake that afternoon. The sunlight sparkled across the water, and families laughed along the shore. It should have felt ordinary, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every word, every glance between them carried the weight of what had almost happened as they walked along the path. Alex finally spoke the words hanging in the air. "I don't want last night to scare you." Claire looked at him sharply. "It didn't scare me." "Then what?" "It made me realize how complicated this is," she admitted. "How easy it is to let our feelings get ahead of us." "Maybe," he said quietly, "or maybe it made us realize what's been here all along." Her breath caught. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that what he felt was just confusion, a temporary bond born from timing and circumstance. But the truth was harder, because deep inside, she knew it wasn't temporary. It had been building slowly, quietly, until that storm had forced them to see it. They stopped at the edge of the dock, the water lapping gently against the wood. Claire stared at the horizon, her thoughts a storm of their own. Alex stood beside her, his presence steady, waiting. "Alex," she said softly, "this can't be easy. Not for you, not for me. But I can't deny what I feel anymore." He turned to her, his eyes searching. "Then don't deny it. Don't run from it." Her chest tightened. She wanted to step into his words, to let herself fall into the possibility of what they could be. But before she could decide, voices approached from behind a family walking down the path. Children laughing. Claire stepped back instinctively, breaking the moment again. The spell had been interrupted once more, but this time, something had shifted. The feelings were out in the open now, undeniable, unspoken, yet real. That evening, Claire sat alone on the porch, watching the stars. The quiet of the night pressed around her, but her thoughts were anything but quiet. She replayed every look, every word, every pause that had hung between them. When Alex finally joined her, he didn't sit right away. He stood for a moment, watching her. Then he said softly but firmly, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't even know what this means. But I know one thing. I don't want to pretend anymore." Claire's heart pounded in her chest. The honesty in his voice was undeniable, the sincerity in his eyes impossible to ignore. She had spent years pretending, years silencing the part of herself that longed for more. And now, here he was, refusing to let her hide. She turned to face him, her voice trembling, but clear. "Neither do I." The night air seemed to thicken, the space between them charged with possibility, and for the first time Claire knew whatever happened next, nothing between them would ever be the same. The stars glimmered above them, scattered like promises across the night sky. Claire sat stiffly in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, though the tea inside had long gone cold. Alex leaned against the porch railing, his eyes not on the stars but on her. The silence between them felt different, not awkward, not heavy, but charged, as if both of them were bracing for what came next. "Claire," Alex finally said, his voice steady though quiet, "I meant what I told you earlier. I don't want to pretend anymore." Her heart clenched. She had been preparing herself for this moment, rehearsing words in her mind, warnings she thought she should say. But when she looked at him, at the sincerity written across his face, every rehearsed line dissolved. "I've been pretending for years," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Pretending I was fine, pretending I didn't want more. I told myself I was too old for change, to set in my ways, too. Everything. And then you came here." Alex's eyes softened. He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "And now?" Claire drew in a shaky breath. "Now I don't know how to stop feeling what I feel." The truth hung in the air, raw and undeniable. For the first time she had spoken it aloud. And the weight of it made her chest both lighter and heavier at once. Alex sank into the chair beside her. "It doesn't have to be complicated," he said softly. "We don't need to figure out the whole world tonight. All I need to know is that this, whatever it is, matters to you as much as it matters to me." Her throat tightened. "Of course it matters," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The night hummed with crickets, the air thick with possibility. Claire's hand rested on the arm of her chair, trembling slightly. Slowly, Alex reached out, his fingers brushing hers, a silent question in the gesture. She didn't pull away. She let their hands rest together, small and steady. Like the first page of a story neither of them had expected to write. The next day felt different. The sun rose as it always did, spilling light over the quiet lake. But the world seemed sharper, clearer. Claire moved through her kitchen with a calm she hadn't felt in years, while Alex sat at the table sipping coffee, watching her with an ease that made her both nervous and strangely safe. Yet the unspoken lingered. They had crossed into something new, but they hadn't yet named it. They hadn't dared it in the afternoon. They decided to hike the trail that wound through the woods. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Their steps fell in rhythm, side by side, neither rushing nor lagging behind. Halfway through, they stopped at a clearing where the trees parted, revealing a sweeping view of the valley. Claire caught her breath at the sight of the rolling hills, the way the sunlight painted everything gold. But more than the view, it was the moment itself, standing there with Alex, that stole her words. "This is beautiful," she murmured. Alex glanced at her, his voice soft. "So are you." She turned sharply, startled by the directness, but he didn't flinch or look away. He just held her gaze, calm and sure, as if the words were the most natural truth in the world. Her heart thundered. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of all the reasons they couldn't be here, like this, saying things like that. But instead, she felt her lips curve into a trembling smile. "Alex," she began, but her voice trailed off. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers again. "I know what this looks like. I know what people might say. But none of that matters to me. What matters is us. Right now." She searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. There was none, only steady conviction. Claire's chest ached with the weight of choice. She had spent her life making the safe decisions, the sensible ones. But standing here, with the world spread out before her and Alex's hand warm in hers, she realized that maybe the safest choice of all was to finally let herself live. "I don't know where this will lead," she said, her voice breaking. "But I don't want to run anymore." Alex's fingers tightened around hers, and the smile that broke across his face was both relieved and radiant. "That's all I needed to hear." That evening, back at the cabin, they sat by the fire. The flicker of flames painted shadows across the walls, wrapping the room in warmth. Claire leaned back against the couch, her head heavy with thoughts and yet light with possibility. Alex sat close beside her, not pressing, not rushing, simply being there for the first time in years. Claire felt something she had long buried hope. "You know, this changes everything," she said quietly. "I know," Alex replied, "and I wouldn't change it back for anything." She turned to look at him. Really, look. The boy she had once known was gone, replaced by someone stronger, steadier. Someone who had grown into a man before her eyes. And though part of her still wrestled with fear, another part, the part that had longed for connection, for love, for more, finally let go. The fire crackled between them. She shifted slightly, her hand brushing his again, and this time there was no hesitation. Their fingers laced together naturally, as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. No words were needed. The silence spoke for them, carrying the weight of everything they had confessed, everything they had chosen. Claire closed her eyes, her heart beating steady for the first time in years. She knew the path ahead would not be simple. There would be questions, doubts, complications. But she also knew this. She was not alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days that followed were filled with small, quiet moments. Cooking breakfast together, reading on the porch, walking by the lake as the sun set. Nothing grand, nothing loud, just presence, steady and true. And in those moments, Claire found what she had been missing all along. Not perfection, not certainty, but companionship, understanding, love. In its purest, simplest form. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky turned shades of golden crimson, Alex turned to her and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Tears stung her eyes. She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling, but sure. "And I want you in mine." It wasn't the story she had expected. It wasn't the life she had planned. But as Claire sat beside Alex, watching the last light of day fade into night, she realized something powerful. Sometimes love doesn't arrive the way we imagine. Sometimes it comes quietly, unexpectedly, rewriting the rules, breaking down walls, reminding us that we are still alive, still capable of feeling, still worthy of joy, and in that truth, Claire finally found peace.